Hey, this is Trav here. Just a reminder that there is a Patreon account for this podcast, and it really helps keep this podcast going and paid for every month. And I would just like to thank the supporters so far, and that's Bill, Grant, Lisa, Mog, Dan, and Paula. Thank you so much, and here's the podcast. Hey, welcome to episode 151 of Tales from the Mind Boat, the slow-moving, super fun-time boat ride inside the crazy mind circus of my mind. This is Travis Nash speaking, and thank you very much for listening to this episode. I really do appreciate it. And today's episode is all about being hot and keeping a diary of my sanity as I go further and further down the rabbit hole into a mad hot wonderland. It's a good show, and all you need to do is sit back, relax, think about how good winter is as we set sail. Thursday, 24th of January 2019. Maximum temperature 40 degrees Celsius. I had woken up far too early that day, like stupidly early. The kind of early that for me over 10 years ago would have been the kind of time that I would sarcastically would have called having an early night. I've been getting up early lately because I'm trying to trick myself that I actually have somewhere to go or do during the brand new day. There used to be a time when this was true, and based on those experiences, I found myself pretty convincing. The adjustment period from staying up all night playing Red Dead Redemption 2 until my eyes started burning whenever I eventually had to blink again to getting up to this obscure hour was pretty tough, but I had to do it to beat that fiery wrath of the midday sun that was fast approaching. The heat in Australia is the topic that most people are talking about at the moment, more than anything else or current world issues. Two people who don't know each other that well and are forced to speak to one another and need to make things less awkward will start conversations with, "What about the temperature today?" And then one might reply to that person, "Yeah, it must be in the high 40s today." And then there will be a nervous chuckle followed by an attempt at making a dad joke such as, "At least I'll get my washing dry today," or "The ducks are going to be happy." I don't know why the ducks would be happy about face-melting heat, but perhaps this person has some kind of aquatic bird acquired knowledge and was merely stating a fact, more than trying to fill in the nervous silent pause between two people trying to interact with one another and failing. I once heard someone say, "Well, I would hate to be down a mine on a day like today," which is a peculiar statement. Surely this could be applied to any day or weather condition. When I think of mines, I think of child labour, black lungs, and Indiana Jones minecart chasers. My phone's weather widget window said it was going to be 40 degrees Celsius, which to my American friends is over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. To everybody else, it's the kind of weather that evokes people to make memes of faces catching fire or even exploding, or that playground scene in Terminator 2 that's decimated by the robot apocalypse. I fed my cats and got dressed and stepped outside, expecting to be disintegrated by the tricksy sun, but managed to avoid being detected and began my daily walk around the suburb to give myself a system maintenance check and make sure that my mind and body are still at least being civil to one another and don't want a divorce anytime soon. There are a few cars and people at 5 AM in the morning, but slowly they begin to trickle in and begin to reclaim the streets again. Men with their white caps backwards, jogging along the bike lane and vanishing down laneways into secret worlds that I really don't care to learn about. By the time I get home, my phone beeps with the recognition that I've done my steps for the day, The bastard sun is already rising over the horizon, turning the dark into ribbons of pink and light blue. I hurry back inside and pull the blinds down and wind in all the windows, as I meticulously map out the apartment for sun traps, like I'm Kevin McAllister. The dark stillness that was outside, I've now invited inside my apartment, where it can hide out until things cool down again. But nothing seems to cool down again. The heat seeps in under the door and begins to gas the room. The fan is next to useless, as it just whirls the hot air around, making some kind of heat tornado in the middle of the living room, and my cats make a mad dash for one of their many hiding spots we now call the panic room, and in some ways I wish I could join them. I have no other option but to turn the air conditioner on, and as soon as I do, I hear the electricity company making some kind of cash register sound off in the distance. The machine whirls and splutters, and a puff of winter dust cracks the seal as it opens its plastic mouth and begins to blow arctic winds into my face, and I finally know what true happiness feels like. The sound of the whole suburb turning on their air conditioners can be heard, and soon we're all standing in the middle of a public symphony of whirling air conditioners, all playing in sync of one another, while rich men in expensive suits rub their hands together and think about what all the money in the world would look like if it was all doubled. Friday, 25th of January 2019, maximum temperature 42 degrees Celsius. Friday came with a promise to be even hotter than the last day, like it was a jealous sibling that had parents that were strategically pitting their children against one another for financial gain. I am not constructed for these harsh conditions. I considered doing one of those DNA tests and finding out where my bloodline came from, and then thinking about I wouldn't be so surprised if I found out I was half polar bear, half fairy penguin. I repeated the same routine as the day before, as I was going through the motions and doing combat with a fire-breathing dragon. I dreaded the fact that I had to go see the doctor at midday, and knowing by that time it'd be the most face-melting part of the day, I wondered if wearing some kind of Halloween mask would protect my face from burning. I planned my journey to and from her office with surgeon-like concentration. I made sure to get off at a bus stop with cover and Google Street viewed side lanes that looked like they would allow me to pass through without the sun noticing me. I felt like a hobbit sneaking a ring into Mordor without the big fiery CGI eye from seeing me. The plan, like all plans, didn't go as planned, as the bus came late, and when it eventually came it was held up at the traffic lights. The driver beckoned to me to come to him, so I ran across the road and narrowly avoided a collision with a van that said, "We'll lift it," and the bus driver opened his doors and let me aboard. "I can't stop the bus," he said, waving his arms in all directions like one of those inflatable people they put out the front of car yards. "That's all good," I said to him. "If I stop the bus, the engine will stop, and it's barely hanging in there as it is. It's the heat, you see, you can't handle it." I knew how that bus felt. I felt like making an empathetic gesture to the bus, but didn't want to look like I was mocking this poor, hot, flustered bus driver. I passed by a half-full bus of people who were already looking beaten and downtrodden by the heat, fanning themselves with pieces of paper and exhaling loudly into the backs of the head of the person in front of them. I finally made it to the doctor's, and I stepped into the building and was reminded what cool and normal temperatures felt like. I reached for my face and began to pat down the important parts like my eyes and mouth to make sure they were still there, not singed or possibly sizzling. I took the elevator to the second floor and was in between two people talking about the weather. One lady said, "It's horrible out there, isn't it?" And the other person just agreed. And then she continued, "We don't really need this hot weather, do we?" And the woman was still agreeing from the question before, nodding her head in rapid succession. And now she's got a new question to answer. She shook her head and added in some no-no-nos. I'm not sure where this questionnaire was going because I had to get out of the elevator and my appointment, but I think these people will finally get into the answers that there's finally get into an answer to the real question that this country needs answered. Saturday, 26th of January, Maximum temperature 26 degrees Celsius, Australia Day. My computer was trying to tell me it's not going to be as hot today, as it will only be 26 degrees, but I don't believe this. I feel like I need to do some kind of virus check, because surely the summer is not over yet. Those hot days in Australia can last for weeks, like some sort of acquaintance who needs somewhere to stay and lives on your couch for way too many months than they originally planned. I wondered if computers could get heat stroke, and then I answered myself by coming to the conclusion that it was more likely that they would explode because they're too hot, like in Die Hard, which I assume was based on real life events. I wish I could explode. It'd be pretty funny to have the option to just go out in a big loud flesh explosion, and people would cup their gasping mouths with their hands, while they would wonder how they could get a replacement as soon as possible. Today is Australia Day, and I know this because the air is full of the smell of barbecue meat and public outcry over celebrating the colonisation of this country from the Aboriginals. They seem to be getting on before we came along and turned the heat up. I've never been someone who thinks any country is better or worse than we are. I was just born here, and I don't think it gives me any magical powers or any kind of entitlement, just access to something called a pie floater, which is something I think all of us could probably do without. I then thought about the van that said we'll lift it, and I bet that they had about 20 replacements of me ready to go at a minute's notice, and it's just the kind of sneaky things that van guys would get up to. And then I started wondering how to even become a van guy. Having the van is probably the first step, but I assumed they would make exceptions for someone who they could vouch for, or if it was a family member. It was then I realized that I've lost my mind. It's probably in a van right now, going to someplace cooler. Sunday, 27th of January, 27 degrees. Today is supposed to be cooler again, but slightly hotter than yesterday. But people who say this, I think, have forgotten what cooler feels like. I think they need to open the freezer door and lay their head against frozen peas and onions, and go back to that happier time when the world was, I guess, less flammable. Monday, 28th of January, 34 degrees. When I was a kid, Garfield comics were in their peak success. You couldn't go far without some form of product with Garfield's face on it, eating lasagna or saying something sarcastic to his owner John. One of the strangest things about Garfield was he hated Mondays, and I never understood this as a kid. It was normally used as a punchline, and I never understood why it was funny to others, until my mother explained once that it was about people who came into work after having the weekend off and hating to do the whole ritual all over again. But surely all those work days were just as bad as Monday until the weekend came round again. And why does Garfield specifically hate Mondays when he's a cat? Doesn't have to work, and he gets fed homemade lasagna every day. If anything, he should be saying, "I like being a cat." Perhaps that's less funny. Only now I kind of get why Garfield hates Mondays and moaning about it. Perhaps he used to live in Australia when the heat returns, just when you thought it was safe to go back outside again. It seems hotter today than the last couple of days. Maybe because when I went out and put the recycling in the bin, I got burnt on my arms and the back of my neck during the short 3 minutes I was actually outside for. I saw a jogger gallop by and wondered if he was running to the ocean to be with his people, and I wished him all the luck in the world. It was like someone on fire that needed to run to the ocean to extinguish himself, and I kinda get that. When I came back inside, our cats were still sitting confused in the little bed that I've made for them, keeping them in the living room while the fan and air conditioner did their best to keep everybody cool. My oldest cat just sat there with her grumpy face, and I considered that maybe Mondays are a big bummer for cats, especially when you're 99% fluff and a huge heat bag. Tuesday the 29th of January, 36 degrees. It's going to be 36 degrees Celsius today. I think quite a few times today I've passed out because of the heat and went back in time to the 80s, where I was back in primary school, where we were doing environmental studies about how fragile and important this planet is and how we should preserve what we have left. I can recall making posters about factory emissions, drawing pictures of factories with large chimneys with pencil grey smoke in the sky that would cover those yellow Posca paint suns with a quite irate facial features. I don't know who those posters were for. They were put up around the classroom to instill a lesson that I think most of the classroom already got the gist of. Perhaps the message would have been best relayed to those in a position to stop the madness before this planet comes uninhabitable like all the other planets we've found so far. Perhaps we should have sent them all to Parliament so they could wallpaper their walls with the pending doom. I always wondered how scientists could predict the future catastrophes, and would like to think that future time travelers came back and warned us about how hot Australia is going to get in 2019. But nobody important probably took this warning seriously and chose to put their faith in science and experts instead. But honestly, what would they know? It's not like it's a field that they're experts in and studied in for years, and it's their job or anything. In other news, it's so hot, I'm now saving water by unintentionally showering myself in sweat and slowly simmering in my own juices from the inside out. I am a Christmas ham. Wednesday the 30th of January, 38 degrees. Venturing out into the cool, dark empty this morning, I had my lungs and nose overwhelmed with the reminder that it's garbage day. The streets are lined with green bins and yellow plastic lids for recycling. And I don't know if heat has a smell, but it probably smells like summertime garbage, discarded packaging and spoilt meat. The ocean down the road smells even worse, like all the fish have been cooked, and now have gone rotten, and seagulls circle around and consider what human flesh tastes like. I remember as a kid playing The Floor is Lava, and I think that was preparing me for today as I foolishly walked across the hot concrete with no shoes on and barbecued my feet in honour of a late Australian Day celebration. I've started to watch YouTube clips of places in Europe that never get hot, and I wondered if I could smuggle myself there in a fridge. I found myself unconsciously standing by the TV and trying to cool myself with the picture on the screen, like someone would with an open wood fire. I know this sounds crazy, and the fact that I can identify this kinda means that I'm not crazy, right? Around 3 PM today, kids were screaming out as they began walking down the street. I passed by the window to see what was happening, and saw 2 teenage boys with their shirts off, wearing them wrapped around their heads, like they just got out of the shower. One guy looked up at the sun and shouted, "It's too hot," and really held on to that "ot" sound and stretched it out as loud and as long as he possibly could, before he was defeated by a spluttering coughing fit, like a fly flew into his throat. The walls to my apartment were barely hanging in today. They began to warp and come in and out of the plane we're all sharing. I could see the heat now. It was bright yellow mist, like the spice in June. It swarmed around the apartment like fire bees, and all I could do was lay down on the carpet that's now covered in cat hair and made a T-pose, and kept telling myself the fan is doing what it's supposed to do before I passed out for 3 hours. By around 9 PM the sun had taken its final curtain call and turned the sky an unnatural shade of pink and yellow before dimming the lights and turning day back into night again. The murderous rage of my cat, who still blames me for the heat, even though it's cooled down a little, has now returned to her favourite spot in the hammock in our bedroom window. I stood by the hammock and her in the window and patted her head, and we both had a moment like we narrowly survived something quite horrific, the kind of ordeal that made us better off in the long run. It was then I noticed rustling in the bushes near the wall out the front of our apartment where our letterboxes are indented into, and suddenly the guy downstairs emerged shirtless, like he was covered in sweat and mud, like Martin Sheen's character Captain Willard when he reaches the heart of darkness in Apocalypse Now. I pretended not to notice, and he pretended to be stealthy, like some kind of ninja hopping over the wall, doing some kind of forward flip just below where I was standing, and into his window below. I have no idea what's going on, or if I imagined it, or if it was a mirage, but I assume the heat has driven him madder than he already was. I pulled the blind down and walked back to the fridge and rested my cheeks on a packet of frozen peas for 30 seconds. I closed my eyes and smiled to myself, because I knew what heaven tasted like. Thursday the 31st of January, 21 degrees. The great cooling down of Australia has begun. This is evident in the amount of people making jokes about the past heatwave. My Twitter and Facebook feeds are full of jokes and memes and observations about how hot things got, and I guess this is just how we deal with things here, and probably everywhere, especially when it's out of our control. There is not much we can do anymore, but prepare for the next summer and convert our homes into giant industrial freezers just to survive another January. The evening sky was a pale yellow that slowly turned to soft pink like an organic lava lamp, and I noticed I wasn't the only one standing on our balcony looking up at the sky. People were doing the same thing all down our street, and I'm not sure what we're looking for, possible answers to why we have to endure this, or maybe we're just enjoying the cool change in air and the forever changing colours of an Australian sky. So that's it for another week. Thank you very much for listening to this episode. I really do appreciate it. If you like this podcast, you want to hear more, there is over 150 episodes for free right now on iTunes and Spotify and on the Libsyn page. You can listen to it. You can rate and review on iTunes. You can share it on Facebook and Twitter. And you can just tell someone while you're waiting at a self-service checkout. Just recommend it. They'll appreciate it when they get home and drink their 20% off orange juice. You can follow this podcast on Facebook and Twitter just by searching for Tales from the Mind Boat. Doing so lets me know that you are supportive of this project. The theme music for this podcast is composed by Tim Witt, and you can listen to his music right now on SoundCloud just by searching for Tim Witt Sounds, and you can also find his albums on Bandcamp, where you can pay what you think those albums are worth. You can follow me on Twitter at Nashtopia. You can also follow my Instagram account at Travis Nash Draws Things. If you could spare some money, and it's completely optional, I have a Patreon set up that helps support this podcast and myself, as I'm not working at the moment and this is what I do. Also, I make video games, I make art, I do these things, and I very rarely ask for money in return because I'm not that sort of person. But it would be nice to pay bills and use my skills to do such a thing. So if you can spare as little as $1 to my Patreon, the link is in the description. I'd really appreciate it. You can opt out at any time, and of course this is completely optional, but doing so really does show that you're an awesome person. So thanks again. I really do appreciate you listening to this episode. I hope you have a good week. It doesn't get too hot. Until next Monday, stay safe. Peace. 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 Peace.